Malaysia is currently in the final stages of drafting its first Urban Redevelopment Act, URA. This legislation aims to address the challenges of urban slums and outdated infrastructure by promoting systematic and efficient urban renewable efforts. The Act is designed to facilitate urban redevelopment, regeneration, revitalizations, and conservation, ensuring that cities remain viable and livable as the urbanization rate continues to rise. Is this legislation the comprehensive solution we've been waiting for to eradicate urban slum, or is it merely a temporary fix? Now, I welcome you. Ready on the line is Datuk Chang Kim Loong, the Secretary General of the National House Buyers Association, HB. I want to say thank you very much, Datuk, for joining me. Firstly, how does the Urban Renewable Act justify its need over the 9 existing laws that already govern aspects of urban renewal, and what unique challenges does this new law aim to address that the existing legislation cannot?
I say, thank you for inviting me to visit here. The Mandagani government have made several statements to say that they're going to come up with a new called URA law, in short, Urban Redevelopment Act, all that. And they even identified 139 sites in Kuala Lumpur that includes housing, industrial, public lands, commercial building, as well as landed property. Now, the announcement has received a lot of concerns from representative or resident association, management body, NGOs, as well as the Institute of Higher Learning, just to name a few. Now, the main crux of the concern now is the consent threshold. The government is saying that this new URA law is going to have a consent threshold of only 75%, which raised the question whether the government realized that it's not dealing with its own property, but property of private citizens. The government justified it by saying that the drafting is necessary to develop those old buildings, structural obsolete buildings, and unfavourable residents that give rise to crime. Now, we are concerned about this area. Now, let me tell you what an existing law that we have that the government could use to address without the URA. Now, for protection of house buyers, we have got existing law like the Federal Constitution, National Land Code, Housing Development and Management Act, Strata Title Act, Land Acquisition Act, and for absolute building Act. And for absolute building, we have got laws in place like Street Drainage and Building, Local Government Act, Town and Country Planning Act, and as for crimes, we have got Penal Code, Dangerous Drugs Act. Most importantly is, do we need such a law called the Urban Redevelopment Act? Because it is going to impact a lot of our owners here. A lot of owners is going to be very dissatisfied with it.
And Dato', the proposed 75% consent threshold for en bloc sales in a significant change from existing practices. How might this threshold impact minority property owners, particularly in cases where they do not wish to sell, or this lead to potential legal and social conflicts?
Yeah. Now, I have to make it known that we do not stifle redevelopment. We do not stifle rejuvenation. It is good. It's for the greater good of the country, and accordingly. But however, no single owner should be disadvantaged by this present law. To impose a threshold of 75% or 80% for that matter currently requires 100% for stratified title owners. It is very important, hence, that every one owner must give their consent. You cannot come up with a law that says 75% is important, the balance 25% descendant group is not important. Everyone under the current law is important. That is why the government should not, according to our research on that, facilitate a law called the Urban Redevelopment Act to deprive owners of the 25% descending group. This is against Article 13 of the Federal Constitution. And the fact that you have a law called Urban Redevelopment Act, the passing will not legitimize it.
And looking at this situation, the Act appears to draw inspiration from Singapore and Hong Kong's urban renewable strategies, considering Malaysia's unique context, including its larger land mass and mix of freehold and leasehold properties. How relevant are these international models, and what adjustment might be necessary, Dato'?
Well, I have explained on several occasions to the government that Singapore and Hong Kong, they are only land lease area, existing buildings, and land development, as well as the land are scarce on the island. Even in Singapore, the consent threshold is 90% for redevelopment if the building is less than 10 years old. But I can't comprehend why the Singapore government want to demolish a building that is less than 10 years old. That is beyond comprehension. Now, in Malaysia, we have both freehold, leasehold, but there's a glaring significance in land mass in Malaysia as compared to Singapore. The Hong Kong and Singapore are ranked as the world's third and fourth most densely populated countries, respectively, while Malaysia is far behind at 46th position based on the United Nations data of 2021. While en bloc sale or Urban Redevelopment Act is arguably a necessity even in both Singapore and Hong Kong, due to the pressing need for urban redevelopment, this argument does not apply to Malaysia. Why don't our government emulate London? Mana ada redevelopment in London? They preserve and conserve their heritage, cultural and historical sites.
And Dato', what mechanism should be included in the Urban Renewal Act to protect the rights of minority property owners, especially the elderly and those with strong emotional ties to their homes? How can this protection be balanced against the majority's interest in redevelopment?
Well, exactly. How could the minority interest be balanced? Nothing less than 100% participation is a way forward when there is unanimous consent. Everyone must agree. There have been a lot of success cases in Malaysia, one of which is Razak mentioned, whereby it was redeveloped by the developers and 100% has consented to the redevelopment. That is what we want. Everyone is important. You cannot say that only 75% is important. The 25% descendant group could be their own reasons. I tell you, in Malaysia, there are three categories of buyers. First categories of buyers are those investors who buy multiple units. We have second category of owners who are second generation, third generation inheritors. They inherited the property from their parents who were deceased. The third one is the most important one. They are the original owners of the property. They want to stay in the property down there, bring up the family, enjoy good feng shui, and making sure that they must have a voice. Being old is not a crime. Do not forget. All of us are going to get old one of these days, and I don't want to be caught in a situation whereby the younger generation opt us, the old ones, out of the equation because we are the minorities. It doesn't make sense. Like I say, being old is not a crime. Ultimately, all of us are going to reach that zone. Okay?
Correct, and we watch demography from Department of Statistics showing that birth rate is decreasing, even the death rate is also decreasing. This is showing that we are heading way to aging nation much faster than we aim for on 2030. And Dato', how could the Act's provisions for urban redevelopment influence urban migrations patterns and the overall quality of life in Malaysian cities? Is there a risk of over-congestion in already dense urban areas, and how should the Act address the potential socio-economic displacement of residents?
Well, in Malaysia, there are plenty of development lands within Greater Kuala Lumpur vicinity without having to saturate our capital city with high-end condominium and commercial buildings, which are already bogged down by overhang and low occupancy issues. Of course, we need to develop our cities, but Kuala Lumpur and its fringe are already congested enough. We have to avoid overbuilding within the city itself. Studies have shown that adverse effects of urban migration. What is required to develop other part of the country? So Malaysia developed the outskirts among the various railway station towns. The policy makers should ask Railway Asset Corporation, RAC, for its cooperation towards nation building. Allow other towns to flourish. And activities for small towns so that our young generation do not influx into Kuala Lumpur. Create jobs for them, create activities outstation. Like since, for instance, Tanjung Sepat, Tanjung Sepat is famous for fishball. Let's create some small cottage for them in Tanjung Sepat. We now find young folks from Kota Baru, Alostar, climbing into Kuala Lumpur to find jobs and climb into a small unhygiene condition. Who are going to attend to the rice field in Kedah? Kalau semua migrate kepada Kuala Lumpur, who is going to attend to the rice field? That is why we seem to be importing rice nowadays.
Correct, Dato'. This is something that we have to consider very seriously in considering Article 13 of the Federal Constitution, which safeguards the right to property. How does the Urban Renewal Act ensure that the rights of property owners are not infringed upon? What legal recourse would be available to those who oppose redevelopment plans under this act?
Well, the proposed URA, Urban Redevelopment Act, certainly is a contravention of Article 13, rights to own property. Hak kita tahu untuk to own a property. Now, proceeding with a consent threshold of any percentage, majority will win. But what about the dissenting minority? As such, the purported URA will be a blatant contravention of Article 13, and the passing of such a law will not legitimize it. Now, we hope the present government will not emulate the footsteps of its predecessor who tried to ignore the unconstitutional impact such a law would have on house buyers, whether within Kuala Lumpur or within the Malaysia. Now, do you not know even the URA law is going to encompasses not only strata property, though. They will include landed property. So all of our landed, detached house or terrace house is all at risk. So the proposed URA does not only infringe fundamental constitutional rights, but also usurp the owner's rights of indefeasibility of title under our current law. Under National Land Code, land title registration is conclusive evidence of our ownership, and nobody can take that away from us. The government sometimes seems to be under the mistaken belief that it can circumvent all these legal principles and take away a rightful property owner's right to refuse by simply enacting a law. I think these people have been ill-advised. We hope the government is not being swayed by the whispers of mercenary property developers, whom the government always call them as economic drivers. Think about the rakyat. Terima kasih.
And thinking about the riot, every act or every action must be aligned to a broader goal, especially the national agenda. How does the proposed Urban Renewal Act align with broader goals of sustainable urban development in Malaysia? And my last question, what strategies, Datuk, should be implemented to ensure that urban renewal efforts do not lead to long-term negative consequences such as increased pollution, loss of green spaces, and social inequality?
Well, I call this new law, Urban Redevelopment Act, as one privatization scheme. Semua dah privatize lah, semua orang. That will benefit developers at the expense of less advantageous owners with the lower 75% percentage. Now, under the URA, the government has come up to encourage developers to participate. They are giving tax incentive and non-tax incentive. Tax incentive, of course, you get exemption from development charges, improvement, conversion premium, all that. But the non-tax incentive is the worrying part, you know. They are saying that the development plot ratio will be increased, will be allowed to be increased. Provision of open space are flexible. Meaning the open space kita boleh bincang sama ada local council together with the developer. It means we're going to lose out on the open spaces, all that. And construction of affordable housing pun boleh bincang. Everything seems to be boleh bincang. At the end of the day, we seem to be shortchanged all the time. That is why I would call this URA law as urban entrepreneurism, or adversely, we call it Robin Hood adverse effect, whereby it is legalizing something, stealing from the poor to give it to the rich, where the poorer owners are deprived of their rights. That is how I see it, especially so when it comes to this privatization scheme, you know.